Stephanie White just sat down for an interview that exposed exactly how coaches feel about the CBA negotiations dragging on. She didn't hold back about what it's really like sitting in limbo, waiting for decisions that affect everything from scheduling workouts to planning roster moves. White revealed the chaos behind the scenes that nobody talks about. Coaches are stuck between players, front offices, and league politics with zero control over the timeline. Do you think WNBA coaches have it harder than coaches in other leagues when dealing with CBA uncertainty? Let me know in the comments. It's also hard because we have a lot of players that are in and out of market, and so from a scheduling and workout standpoint, we schedule a week ahead and schedule a week in advance, and if it's gonna shut down, then we need to shut everything down. And hopefully we can continue to work with our players that are injured because we have a lot of them in market as well. But it's very difficult being in limbo. It's very difficult when you're talking to your staff and you don't really know anything. Stephanie White recently appeared on Sue Bird's podcast, Bird's Eye View, and the conversation about the CBA situation was eye-opening. White is the head coach of the Indiana Fever, one of the most high-profile positions in women's basketball right now, thanks to Caitlin Clark and the team's resurgence. When Sue asked her about the CBA extension and what it's like as a coach waiting for resolution, White's answer revealed just how messy this situation is for everyone involved. And it's part of the growing process of our league. We certainly understand that as our staff is mostly former players. We understand that as well. But being in limbo is difficult. The WNBA and the WNBPA agreed to a 6-week extension that includes an option for either party to terminate with just 48 hours notice. That detail is critical because it means nobody actually knows if they have 6 weeks or if everything could collapse in 2 days. White admitted it's incredibly difficult to sit and wait, not knowing when things will shake out, when free agency will start, or what the calendar will even look like moving forward. Think about that from a coaching perspective for a moment. White and her staff are trying to prepare for next season, but they can't make concrete plans because the fundamental rules of the league might change dramatically. They have players coming in and out of market. They're scheduling workouts a week in advance, but if the CBA negotiations lead to a work stoppage, everything shuts down immediately. They can't even be sure if they'll be able to continue working with injured players who are currently in Indianapolis rehabbing. I think we can game plan for what we'd like to have. I think the way that things shake out in terms of what things look like financially, we have a young core, so that will certainly impact, our ability to make certain moves in free agency. I'm glad I'm not the GM, I can tell you that. White described the situation as being in limbo, which is exactly what it is. She's having conversations with her staff where she literally doesn't know anything concrete to tell them. That's a terrible position for a leader to be in. Her staff is looking to her for direction and clarity, and she can't provide it because the League and Players Association are still negotiating fundamental terms of employment. But here's where White showed real perspective. She acknowledged that this is part of the growing process of the league. Her staff is mostly former players, so they understand the importance of what's happening on the players' side of these negotiations. They get that the WNBPA is fighting for better conditions, higher salaries, and more favorable contract terms. White isn't complaining about that aspect. She's just being honest about how difficult it is operationally to function in this environment. From a timing standpoint, how much time there will be to adjust, what it's going to look like, roster spots, roster management, not just what it looks like financially. How many players are we going to have on a roster? What is it going to look like for us? We can't just think in the terms of 1 year. What's it going to look like for us in the next 3 years? What can it look like in the next 3 years? What can it look like in the next 5 years? So I think the buffer of when we would have normally had, a 3 to 4 week time frame to look at it, it is not going to be there. So we're going to have to make decisions quickly. The CBA will determine major structural elements that directly affect coaching decisions. One of the biggest is whether core designations will still exist. For those who don't follow WNBA contract structures closely, the core designation allows teams to essentially franchise tag a player and prevent them from reaching free agency. It's controversial because it limits player movement and salary potential. But from a team-building perspective, it's crucial for franchises trying to maintain continuity. White said they can game plan for what they'd like their roster to look like, but the financial realities depend entirely on how the new CBA shakes out. The Fever have a young core, which will significantly impact their ability to make moves in free agency depending on how salaries are structured in the new agreement. White specifically noted she's glad she's not the general manager because the timing of when they'll need to make decisions is going to be compressed dramatically. Normally, teams have 3 to 4 weeks after the CBA is finalized to evaluate options and make strategic decisions. That buffer won't exist this time. Teams are going to have to make critical roster decisions quickly without the usual time to analyze scenarios and contingencies. White said their ability to anticipate what might happen is severely limited. They're going to have to respond instead of react, and do it in whatever time frame becomes available. The expansion draft adds another layer of complexity that White touched on. The league is adding teams in Portland and Toronto. Those franchises need to build competitive rosters, but they're doing it in an environment where nobody knows what the salary structure will look like or how many roster spots each team will have. The expansion draft can't happen until the CBA is finalized because the rules governing player movement and protection lists depend on the collective bargaining agreement. White also discussed the broader challenges of free agency in this new era of the WNBA. The league is experiencing unprecedented growth and attention, but the infrastructure hasn't caught up. There's massive revenue coming in from new television deals, increased sponsorships, and exploding ticket sales. The players obviously want their share of that revenue growth, which is completely reasonable. But the negotiations over how to divide that money fairly are holding up everything else. The draft lottery already happened. Dallas got the number 1 pick, giving them back-to-back number 1 selections. Sue Bird pointed out during the interview that historically, teams with back-to-back number 1 picks generally win championships. The pressure is on Dallas and also on Indiana, which had back-to-back number 1s with Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark, but none of these teams can properly plan for integrating their draft picks until they know what the roster rules and salary structures will be. White got into the challenges of scouting and evaluating college talent without proper infrastructure. The WNBA doesn't have a combine anymore. They used to bring top prospects in for measurements, interviews, and competitive drills. You can see how someone performs in games easily enough by watching film. But the nuance that determines whether a player will stick and develop in the WNBA is harder to assess without direct interaction. Teams can't work players out individually. There's no centralized evaluation process. Some college programs are doing pro days, which helps somewhat. But White emphasized the importance of the interview process. She finds it challenging that players are now attending 4 schools in 4 years. As a coach trying to evaluate draft prospects, you need to understand why someone transferred multiple times. Is it coaching changes and fit issues, which are understandable? Or is there a pattern of behavior indicating someone who's unwilling or unable to commit to a system and work within a time frame? That's critical information because most rookies aren't going to play significant minutes immediately. They need to be willing to develop within a team structure and stay ready even when they're not in rotation. Those qualities aren't obvious just from watching games. White said they need deeper evaluation opportunities, whether that's through combines, enhanced pro days, or better interview processes. The league needs to figure something out because the margin for error is gone. Teams can't afford to make draft mistakes anymore. The roster size question ties directly back to the CBA negotiations. White strongly advocated for roster expansion during the interview. Right now, teams carry 11 or 12 players. That's not enough when you have 2 expansion teams entering the league, and talent depth is actually quite good. There are players who have the potential to contribute in the WNBA, but don't get opportunities simply because there aren't enough roster spots. White pointed out that when you're holding an 11 or 12 player roster, you need players who can impact immediately. There's no room for development projects. Teams have been forced to use hardship exceptions repeatedly this season, just to have enough healthy bodies. If rosters expanded to 14 or 15 players, those additional spots would be in the system every day, working within the team structure and developing. Then, when their number gets called due to injury or circumstance, they're actually ready to contribute. The contrast between veteran teams and young teams came up naturally when Sue asked White about coaching Connecticut in 2023 versus coaching Indiana in 2024 and 2025. Connecticut was a veteran-laden team fresh off a finals appearance. They had all-stars like Alyssa Thomas and Brianna Jones. That team didn't need much from a structural perspective. White said sometimes teams just need a new voice, new energy, new vibe. The core was already elite. They just needed fresh perspective. Working with that Connecticut team taught White about the intensity elite veterans bring. She specifically mentioned that when the veteran players returned from overseas commitments, the practice intensity immediately jumped to another level. Players like Alyssa Thomas set a standard through their competitive fire that elevated everyone around them. White compared AT's competitiveness to Tamika Catchings, saying they both refuse to be denied and will their teams to accomplish things people might not think possible. But coaching veterans is different from coaching young players in fundamental ways. White got into the practical differences when discussing her experience with Indiana. With young players, you need significantly more practice time. Veterans can handle 40 to 45-minute focused sessions and execute efficiently. Young players need repetition. What you installed yesterday might have significant slippage by today. You can't just review adjustments and shoot around. Sometimes you need to go over the base concepts again because they haven't been internalized yet. Indiana had been at the bottom of the league in defense before White arrived. She spent enormous time on defensive expectations, principles, and dynamics. Connecticut didn't need that because they'd always been strong defensively, especially with AT setting the tone. With young players, you can't do drills that cover 4 things simultaneously. You need focused, specific teaching that builds gradually. White's hope is that Indiana will eventually reach that efficiency level, but they're not there yet. The experience gap matters tremendously. Indiana's young core hadn't been to the playoffs before this season. They were talented and had some experience, but they hadn't been there yet in terms of understanding what it takes daily. White pointed out they lost games early and late in the season that they shouldn't have lost. Those losses are the difference between hosting playoff games versus traveling, which is the difference between playing potential Game 5s at home versus on the road. Young teams need to learn these lessons the hard way sometimes. White said her coaching staff had to bring more energy, maintain discipline around details, and prevent slippage from occurring. It was a different type of challenge than coaching veterans, but it energized her staff. The ability to develop young talent and watch growth happen is rewarding in ways that coaching established stars isn't. The Caitlin Clark dynamic obviously came up because you can't discuss the Indiana Fever without addressing their superstar. White had covered Clark's college games multiple times as a broadcaster, so she had some relationship before taking the Indiana job. But building trust with Clark was crucial because she's the centerpiece of everything they do. White needed to connect with Clark as a person, earn her trust, and establish herself as someone who could coach and challenge her effectively. White is a firm believer in coaching and challenging your best players. She can't do that without trust. White described herself as a very honest and transparent coach. Players know what she's thinking and where she's coming from. If they don't, they can ask and will get direct answers. She appreciated that Clark operates similarly. They're both competitive to the point of being psycho about winning, as White put it. That shared intensity creates natural understanding. White also emphasized building relationships with Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell. Those 3 players are the core, and White's priority was earning their trust early. You can't just walk in and dictate terms to elite players. It's about building relationships and understanding what drives each person individually. White learned that Kelsey Mitchell is a pros pro who's incredibly low maintenance. She just wants to play basketball. She wants to know you care about her and will be honest with her. But beyond that, she's not demanding or difficult. Just put her in positions to succeed. Mitchell had been through the worst years of Indiana basketball. She was the constant through organizational chaos after Tamika Catchings retired. White felt Mitchell deserved the opportunity to be part of Indiana's successful years after suffering through the rebuild. That respect for veterans who pay dues is important to White. With Aaliyah Boston, White discovered a basketball IQ and facilitating ability that wasn't obvious watching her in college. Boston is smart enough to function almost as a point forward. She understands the game conceptually and can pass and facilitate at high levels. When Clark wasn't on the floor, Boston had to be the point guard. That versatility was crucial to Indiana's success, and something White didn't fully appreciate until coaching her daily. With Clark, what struck White most was the efficiency and focus. There are no wasted movements, reps, or moments. Clark accomplishes everything because every second is maximized. White acknowledged the spotlight and weight Clark carries is enormous. She compared Clark to Taylor Swift 2.0 in terms of cultural impact and attention. Yet somehow Clark compartmentalizes all of that, shows up to the gym, and gets everything done. White has massive respect for Clark's work ethic and elite basketball mind that sees plays 2 or 3 passes ahead. Stephanie White's interview revealed exactly how chaotic the CBA situation is for coaches who have to plan with zero concrete information. She's stuck in limbo like everyone else while trying to prepare for next season. Her perspective on roster expansion, draft evaluation, and building young teams was invaluable.